This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, welcome everyone. Bruchim Abbaim. Today's shir is sponsored by a good friend, Rav Dan Zalkin, Leon Nishmas, his mother's yahrzeit on Tes Nisan, Esther Bas Rav Moshe, Neshama Shavin Aliyah Shvil Meils Yoshar for his home mishpacha, Adbias Goyal Tzedek. The Tefilla series is sponsored by a good friend, Rabbi Rose of Los Angeles, Leon Nishmas, his brother Tzvi Ben Levi Yitzchak, his Neshama Shavin Aliyah Meils Yoshar for his whole family. So today's shir, we're going to have two parts. The first shir is going to be on really Parshas Vayikra, but connected to Tefilla as well. And then I would like to share some thoughts with you about the upcoming Yom Tov of Pesach. This is a subject I wanted to speak about for a while. I think it's a rather basic subject. It's a subject that I'm sure we all know about, but the ramifications of are quite interesting to me. I actually prepared this year, last year on Pesach. I was learning Mishnah Brura, a few years ago on Pesach. I was learning Mishnah Brura Hilchos Tefilla, and I came across a number of interesting items. It's well known, the Gemara Brachos on Chavav Amud Beis, the discussion, the Tefillos, are they connected the Avos, or are they connected the Korbonos? Shachris Mincha Marav. Is it connected Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, or the Tamid Shel Shachar, the Tamid Shel Ben Arabayim, and Hekter, Chalav, and Veivarim? So the Gemara says, Izmar Rav Yosi, Rabbi Chanina, Amar, Tefillos Avos Tiknam. The fathers enacted Tefillah. Rabbi Shua ben Levi Amar, Tefillos Keneged Tamidim Tiknam. They correspond to the carbon Tamidim. I'm actually writing up a piece now in Sefer Bereshis. Be'ez Hashem, the Sefer will have almost 60 chapters. And one of the last chapters we're writing is on Parshas Vayikra, the inyan that the Tefillos correspond to the Avos. So Shachris is Keneged Avram. That's why we put on Talis and Tefillin in Shachris, because since in the merit of Abraham, who said, Michut v'yad sroi chanal, we have Talis and Tefillin, and Shachris is in the Zchus of Abraham, therefore we combine the two together. That's how we say Adonai Olam by Shachris, because Avram Avinu, the Gemara says in Brachos, invented the term as Hashem as Adonai Olam. So, and the subject speaks a lot about the fact that why would Marav be the most lenient of all the tefillos if it's Keneged Yaakov Avinu, who's Bechir Shaba Avos? So that's a piece, B'ezras Hashem, the upcoming Bereshis Sefer. But there's a whole other way to look at tefillah, and that is Keneged Korbonos. So we have Machlokes Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Chanina, and Rabbi Shua ben Levi. So Rabbi Shua ben Levi says tefillos are Keneged the Tmidim. The Gemara brings a brayso like Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Chanina, and a brayso like Rabbi Shua ben Levi. The brayso like Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Chanina, it says Avram Masakin Shachris, Yitzchak is Masakin Mincha, Yaakov is Masakin Mariv. And then the Gemara cites a brayso like Rabbi Shua ben Levi, that Tfilas HaShachar is until Chatzos. Why? Because Tamid Shel Shachar is brought to Chatzos. Rabbi Yehuda says Arba Shois because the Tamid Shel Shachar is Arba Shois. And Mincha is Ado Erev because the Tamid Shel Ben Arabayim is brought until the Erev. Rabbi Yehuda says Plaga Mincha because Tamid Shel Ben Arabayim is brought until Plaga Mincha. Marav Ein La Keva because Evarim Upedarim that were not digested Miba Erev could be brought the whole night. And why is the carbon musaf brought the whole day? Because the carbon musaf can be brought the whole day. Rabbi Yehuda says till 7 hours, because the carbon musaf is brought till 7 hours. And Mincha Gedolah is 6.5 hours, and Mincha Ketana is 9.5 hours. Fine. So that's a brisa in accordance with Rabbi Shua ben Levi. So the Gemara says, Tiyufta de Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina, because clearly it's not like the Avos. So Rabbi Yosi Chanina says, no, really the Avos are masakin it, and the Rabbanan were masmichin on our Korbonos. Because you have to say that. Because Musaf, according to Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina, who is masakin it? Who is masakin Musaf according to Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina, if it's Tefillah Keneged the Avos? Elamai, the Avos were masakin the Tefillah, and they are masmich on the Korbonos. Fine. So in our previous shir on the subject, we discussed who the Rambam paskins like, who the Rif paskins like. The Rashi in Masechta Shabbos says an amazing idea that the Shita that Marav who holds that Marav is Rishus is going like the opinion that it's Keneged Korbonos. And since Hektar Chalam Evarim does not always exist, they're not always fats and limbs to burn, so Marav is Rishus. But if you say Tefilla is Keneged the Avos, of course Marav is a Chayv. Fine. The subject of today's shir is the halachic ramifications of the fact that Tefillah is Keneged Korbonos. Halacha number 1. This comes from Shulchan Aruch, Siman Tzadi Ches Sif Dalet. Ha-Tefillah hi b'makom ha-Korban. Tefillah is in the place of Korbonos. We'll see if we can make it even bigger. No. Therefore, one has to be careful that one's prayer is similar to a korban. In kavana, don't mix in any other thoughts. Like machshava that disqualifies kodshim. So in other words, the same way by kodshim, improper thoughts renders a korban improper. Improper thought could ruin a tefillah. It should be standing. Why do we stand by Shemana Esrei? Dumya da'avoida, because the one being makriv the korbanos must stand. Why are we koivea makoim in tefillah? In other words, why do we daven in the same place every day? Some people, they like to stroll around the shul. You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to have a set place. You're not supposed to have, it's not musical chairs. One is supposed to have a set seat. Why? Kamay ha-karbanish, kol echad kavua mekoimai. But Safa, in the Daraim, every korban has a different makoim, so therefore tefillah should have a set place. Another halacha, we know that ideally one should stand in tefillah right before the wall. So you say, not everyone in a shul fits by the wall, but truthfully, everyone is davening by the wall. A set table is not a chatzitza, a person is not a chatzitza, so technically even the guy in the back row, he's also standing in front of the wall. But where does this halacha come from that there should not be any interposition between a person and the wall? And the Shulchan Aruch says that dumya de korban shechatzitza poiselas beinoi lekli. Just like by a korban, a chatzitza disqualifies between you and the vessel, so too there should not be any interruption between you and the wall. Another thing is v'roi sheyialoi malbushim naim miuchadim latfila. One should have nice clothing designated for prayer. Kagoin bigdei kahuna, just like the bigdei kahuna. Most people, not everyone is able to afford a special suit for davening. Nevertheless, you should have special undergarments designated for davening, so just that a person should be in a more pristine shape for davening mishum nekiyas. That's why really it is recommended that one wear a jacket for davening. Why? Number one, there's a halacha that when you daven, you're supposed to dress as if you'd be standing in front of a king or a president. Now, that halacha used to dictate that one is required to wear a hat for davening. And I've even seen in some poskim that nowadays, for better or for worse, many people do not wear a hat when they go in front of a president or a king. It's not sort of the Western style of dress. That may or may not be true. That's probably accurate. It may not be objectively correct, but that's the state of reality. But to wear a jacket, even in 2020, with the informality of society, everybody would wear a jacket, or almost anybody would wear a jacket if they had the audience of the President of the United States. And therefore it's certainly recommended to wear a jacket when you daven. But here we're seeing a new dimension of that, and that is the same way when you bring a korban, you should have special begadim, bigdei kahuna, so too when you daven, you should have special begadim. Okay. Furthermore, the Mishnah Brura adds another halacha, and that is the same way there should not be an interposition between you and the wall, there shouldn't be an interposition between you and the floor. Betur kasavoid ubeina lekarka. Your feet should be on the ground, like in the Beis Hamikdash. I mean, obviously, you're not going to take off your socks, but the same way there shouldn't be a chatzitza between you and the wall, there shouldn't be a chatzitza between you and the floor. Fine. So I want to show you a number of other interesting nafkaminas of the fact that tefillah is keneged the Korbonos. Let's say a person is mesupik if they daven or not. Then they go back and they daven, and you don't have to be mechadesh something. That means as follows. Let's say a person says, I daven 3 times today, I would like to daven a few extra Shemona Esreis. Technically, you're allowed to, as long as you add something to your Shemona Esrei. And the reason why you're allowed to is because the same way you're allowed to bring a Korbonos Nadava, you're allowed to do a Tefillas Nadava. However, you have to be adding something in your Tefillah, and therefore you have to have a new Kavana. But if you're mesupik, whether you davened or not, you could daven again. And you say, if I didn't daven, so I'm davening now. And if I daven, this will be a Tefillas Nadava. Now, do I have to add something? I don't have to add something, because what I'm adding is, this tefillah will ensure I'll be yotzei the davening. Aval in barilai, however, if you're sure, shespala inu chazim espal b'loi chidush. You can't go back and down without adding something, but if you add something, chayzer mespala b'nadava kol ha-pa'amim sheyusi. You can daven as many times as you want, chutz mit tefillas musaf. Except for musaf, you can't daven a tefillas nadava. Why? Says the Mishnah Berurah, look over here. You can't daven another musaf. Kivan sha'omer musafim kilchasam, because in davening you're saying the musaf as its halacha is, and a musaf is not brought as a nadava. A musaf is a chiyuv. And the musaf is only mishal tzibur, and ein yachid yachal nadav. An individual cannot be menadav. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, it comes out like this. If you're mesupik on Shabbos, whether you davened or not, you can't daven again. The only reason you could daven again during the week is you could say, if I davened, it should be a tefillas nadava. But on Shabbos and Yom Tov, you can't bring a korban nadava. So if you can't bring a korban nadava, you can't bring a tefillas nadava. So on Shabbos and Yom Tov, you can't daven again if you're not sure if you davened. Another interesting aspect of tefillah being like a korban, the Mechaber says Shabbos and Yom Tov, you can't daven a tefillas nadava at all. Says the Mishnah Berurah, why can't you daven a tefillas nadava on Shabbos? Because you can't bring a korban nadava on Shabbos. You hear this? You can't daven a tefillas nadava on Shabbos because you can't bring a korban nadava on Shabbos. Another interesting halacha, number 6. Ein tzibur mispala and tefillas nadava klal. The tzibur cannot offer a tefillas nadava. Says the Mishnah Berurah, why? Because the tzibur is not makriv a korban nadava. The only korban nadava a tzibur could bring is something the ketz hamizbeach when the mizbeach is batal, and that's a very uncommon scenario. And therefore, we don't daven Shemona Esrei corresponding to the nadavos of ketz hamizbeach. However, a yachid is allowed to daven tefillas nadava if he adds something, even if he's saying it with a tzibur. Okay. Now the Mechaber says another thing. Haroitzel espal tefillas nadava. If you want to daven a tefillas nadava, tzarich shehe makir es atzma. You need to recognize yourself. Zariz v'zahir. Zariz energetic and careful. V'amid b'daitoi. And have great focus, that you could concentrate in your davening from beginning to end. If someone who is not able to have good kavana, karinan bay, we consider it, we call out, we say about such a scenario, lama li roib zivchechem. Why do I need your abundant korbanos? So here the halacha says that you can only daven a tefillas nadava if one is able to have great kavana. If one is not able to have great kavana, then God says, I don't need your abundant korbanos. Now what does that mean? The guy's not bringing a korban, he's davening. So again, we see that tefillah has the reality of korbanos. Says the Mechaber, "Halavai sheyuchal lechavein b'sholish tefillos hakvois l'yom." Halavai, we could concentrate on the 3 established tefillos. another aspect of tefillah being like a korban. Says the Shulchan Aruch, Kishepoiseya, when you take your steps, Oike regel small tchila. You first uproot your left foot. You first step out of your left foot. V'shir psiyos elu, and the shear of these steps, the chalapachas u'kadesh yitain gudal b'tzad akev. It's at least that you put your toe by your heel. However, that implies you're allowed to take bigger steps, and the Ramah says, no, l'chadchila, you should not take bigger steps than that. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah, what's the reason for the shear? Amazing Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Uchemoi psiois hakoyhanim b'shas avoida shayu mehalchen. Okay, b'tzad gadol. The reason that we take these dainty steps, I don't think I realized this. The reason why we take small steps with your toe by your heel is in order to emulate the kohanim. That's how they would walk when they did the avodah. The Magen Avram says less than this shear is not considered a psi at all, and you're not to be makel even if you have no room. Some are makel if the rows are very cramped. You could take shorter steps. Okay, and finally the last halacha is you should not take bigger steps, says the Mishnah Berurah, because tefillah is keneged the tamidim. Ube'inyan dumya the kahanim ba'avoidasam. You need it to be similar to the kahanim in the avodah. V'chein lo yishma psiois gasais yoiser. Therefore, you shouldn't take bigger steps. And it also looks like you're running before the king. And as we've mentioned in the past, one of the reasons why we wash our hands in the morning, I'm not talking about negel vaser, I'm talking about before davening, and we make a bracha of al natilas yadayim, is because the Rashba says in the morning we're a new creation, and like kohanim who do their avodah, they wash their hands from the kiyar, we also wash our hands from the kiyar. And that's the reason why Shemona Esrei is keneged the Kodesh HaKadoshim. But this is all in the theme that davening is keneged the Korbonos, and the ramifications of that are you have to be careful about your thoughts, like with a korban, one has to be standing, like bringing a korban. There can't be a chatzitza, like bringing a korban. One should have special begadim, like bringing a korban. So far that's kavana, standing, chatzitza, malbushim. There shouldn't be a chatzitza between you and the floor. The parameters of tefillas nadava are based on the parameters of korbanos. And the steps that we take during Shemona Esrei are like the steps of the kohanim. Okay, so this...
What about Tumah, Rabbi? I mean, if it's all connected to korbanos, how could we daven properly if we're in a state of Tumah? You couldn't bring a korban if you were Tameh.
So that's why you're talking not allowed to daven. That's why you have to wash your hands. So that's keneged the kohanim. Moreover, many people are makbid that if they go to the mikveh before davening for tumas keri. So again, it's parallel to korbanos, but we are tamei meis. So and most shuls don't have a paraduma in the front lobby. Although, if anybody would like to sponsor one in our new shul, then you could speak to us privately. Okay, Mar Rabbi side, that's the end of the tefillah. I want to share with you perhaps some thoughts on the Yom Tov of Pesach.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.